this fourth meeting of the PAB and reminding everyone, as we have been reminded, that the meeting is being recorded. We want to begin with the roll call. District 1.
Fitzpatrick, this is one.
District 2, yours truly, present. District 3.
Ralph Davis, present.
District 4.
Jerry Rolling Ford, present.
Sabers.
Yes, and we know District 5 and 6 are vacant. District 7.
DeShaun-Feurer, present.
Thank you. Our at-large members, Ms. Kara White.
Kara White, present.
And Nigeria Rolling Ford.
Yes, sorry. Present. Nigeria.
That's okay.
When you
Thank
said
you, all
District 4, I
members.
jumped in there.
That's okay. Thank you. All members are present. We're going to move ahead with our meeting. Everyone have an agenda, I trust. And we're going to begin with our administrative updates. We are glad to report that everyone has completed the information needed to begin training with the Citizens Academy. We thank all of you have done so. That training begins April 5th and runs through May 24th on recurring Wednesdays at the Academy at 700 East Java Road. And I believe Tammy has an update on that as well.
Yes, so everyone's signed up for the academy. Everyone's done their required training or is doing their required training with the ride-alongs. As always, their members can go on multiple ride-alongs if they want to as well, outside of their precinct. And on, when we go to Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead to the second agenda item under Open Meeting Act training. And as required, we must have a representative or designee to be present for our meetings, speaking on Open Meetings Act and act as our expert. Henry?
Yep, so I am certified in the Open Meetings Act now, which dots that I. If there are any other people who are interested on the board who would want to do that training, I can say it's not particularly long. It's all done online. It's a pretty straightforward process. And if there is someone else who's interested in doing it, I can send them the information. And that would help to ensure if for some reason I was sick or otherwise unable to attend the meeting, we'd still be in compliance with state law. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested. Again, it takes maybe an hour or so to do training. And once you have that, we'll be in good shape for when we, particularly for meetings where if and when we needed to go into closed session, having multiple people there who know how to know the procedures for going in and out of that is always helpful. So if you're interested, shoot me an email and I can get you that information.
Great, we'd love to have a backup for this. We're going to go into our presentation on the use of force by Baltimore County Police. So we're very thankful to have present with us today members of Baltimore County Police Department, and they are, I have my notes here. Chief Dennis Delp.
Hey everybody, good afternoon.
Ms. Meg Ferguson, Chief of Staff.
Howdy.
Captain David Trivett, who's the Commander of Internal Affairs.
Good afternoon.
And Sergeant Vincent Luther, Supervisor in our planning section. We also have present with us today Sheriff Fisher, who we're grateful decided to join us and has no part in the presentation, but we're just grateful to have him here in case a question does arise where he would be able to respond to it. But we're going to go right into the presentation.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for being here today and participating and being part of this. What we have Sergeant Vince Luther here is going to go over our policy in reference to the legislative changes that occurred for the reportable uses of force in the state of Maryland. So we're going to have Sergeant Luther go over the policy changes, and then we're going to have Captain Trivett talk about, from an oversight standpoint, from an internal affairs process, as far as the layers of supervision and review process for the use of forces that come through the agency. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Can I just add one thing, as we've discussed at the previous PAB meetings, the department is not attempting or pretending to give the PAB every piece of information today about these big topics. Our focus today is to really present the PAB with the material that was presented to our entire department last summer when the state law changed. And so, we acknowledge that this would be a starting point for your work and understanding, but we think that that's the most effective way to, start to share that information with you. So giving you our updated policy, how we process and do accountability within the department. And also we have a short video that was presented to all department members last summer to help, a training video to help members understand clearly what is a reportable use of force and what is not a reportable use of force under the new law. So again, this is, they're going to give you a lot of material, but we do know this is.
It's not the absolute
everything.
foundational level.
This is building blocks for you, and we will
Sure.
we'll leave you with some handouts, and we're certainly happy to be responsive as you continue your work, to provide you with more information, with more in depth.
Thank you
Is
very
that
much. And
helpful? Sure.
we appreciate the fact that there's certainly a lot of material out there, a lot of perspectives on this topic as well, but it's certainly a topic and an area of policing that every community member is interested in, and especially this board, and regarding our responsibilities. And so we're grateful and appreciate your being here.
Now I'll turn it over to Sergeant Whitman.
Thanks, Chief. Just want to do a quick introduction here. The use of force policy is a significant document. It's 38 pages, and it encompasses various laws, the Baltimore County SMART Act from several years ago, guidance from the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission, and then we'll give you at the end, like Meg said, we'll give you the website. Our policies, most of our policies are forward-facing. So our use of force policy is forward-facing to the public. Part of our transparency and the state requested agencies do that as well. I couldn't remember if you all had kind of like a structure of the department, and it's important because the laws require a level of review, supervisory review up through the chain of command. What I want you to know is that that's nothing new for us. We've been doing this, that's been our standard operating procedure since I've been on the department for almost 28 years. That we have reviewed these uses of forces up through the captain of each precinct. But I just kind of wanted to lay the structure out so you all would see what that kind of looks like and where it routes. So obviously at the top, we have the chief who, thanks for being here today. And then further down, you have the 4 bureaus. Each of those is headed by a colonel. And then mainly the force is usually used by Operations Bureau personnel in the field. So if you look at the Operations Bureau, that's a colonel. And then there's the different divisions. That's handled by a major. Under the divisions would be each of your precincts where you all live in. We have the 10 precincts. And that's commanded by a captain, which I'm the captain. And then you figure we have 24-hour-a-day coverage, 3 shifts a day. That's handled by a shift commander at the rank of lieutenant. And then you have your supervisors, your first-line supervisors in the field, a corporal or a sergeant, and the officer. So if an officer uses force, they complete a document, and we'll give you a copy of our paperwork at the end. The use of force report, it's reviewed by the first-line supervisor, corporal or sergeant. It's reviewed by the shift commander, lieutenant. It's reviewed by the captain. And then it will come to internal affairs for further review for policy. That's the way it used to be. Last year, we added in another level of review, so the division commander will review the use of force. So that ensures consistency across at a higher level across multiple precincts which they're in charge of. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. The new policy that Sergeant will talk about, it distinguishes different levels of use of force. There's a command level use of force, and then there's a use of force packet, which we've always done. It's called a use of force packet, and requires that level of review and documentation in there. So we continue to do that. The state law changed some requirements for our reporting purposes, and those are reviewed by the captain and then sent to us. Internal affairs for policy review. We also are the statistical capture. We house all the statistics for use of force in internal affairs. Any questions about the structure of the department? Hopefully that was kind of helpful, that brief overview, that so you can see how the command structure works and how things are vetted through there. So bear with me as I transition to a technology guru here with the help of Lisa here. Thing's got a gremlin.
It is. It's not.
So can I close that? Ordinance, you want the current article here?
Yes, please.
He said they did.
Funny, it's like, I, but what the heck?
And I can also ask.
All right, so, just to start you all off, since you're gonna be reviewing a larger number of our policies, looking over things, so that you can understand what the format that we use is. Generally, we're gonna start off with sections, and you can see that this, by the title, is Article 12. So our use of force and our use of weapon systems, you're gonna find in our field manual, Article 12. So that's where this is at. So we start off with the number first, which tells you which article you're in. And then we generally start with definitions, if there's any definitions that apply to that area. You see the definitions underlined and then the text description. The blue that you're seeing in the text there is our way of identifying for our folks what has been added, the revisions. We don't really have a way of showing them what's been taken away, but this at least gives them, hey, this is what was added to the existing policy that I was already familiar with and that I know. So as we come down through here, we have our definition of deadly force, de-escalation techniques. The blue that we added there was to try to also explain to folks, our officers in that sometimes if you hear a raised voice, if you hear perhaps colorful language, that can also be in some ways a de-escalation technique where you're trying to impress upon the person the urgency of please put this down, or please move over there. So that's what we were adding in that first, in the second blue area.
Just read the phrase in blue because it is hard to see.
It says that to convey the urgency and necessity of compliance, to transfer a sense of empathy and calm to an agitated person, etc. So what we're talking about there is we're giving our officers some ideas as to what the de-escalation techniques are, some reminders of what they've been trained in, what those techniques are. So do you all want me to go over each individual definition, or would you like to do that at a later time, or do you want me to hit kind of the changes and revisions? I'm not sure. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I also want to provide you with what you're interested in.
Probably if you would go over the definitions you think are most relevant. I mean, a lot of things are going to be new.
Okay.
Important to go over the definitions and how they change.
Probably the first thing in deadly force is just to remind folks that deadly force is not always firearms. That it may also include hands, feet, body parts, less lethal weapons, that it's any force that has a risk of serious physical injury or death. So a lot of folks sometimes automatically connect it to firearms, but it's not always the case. The de-escalation is what ways that we're training our folks in the use to try to gain compliance without the use of force. It's required in the state statute that was passed. So we tell them what we want, that we define the techniques, as I was saying there earlier, and we give them ideas on what those techniques are. As we go down through, this is one of the most important parts of this whole use of force policy revision that we had to do. It was our understanding under the state law that all force that officers use must be reported. And this definition is important because what the department defines as force is what has to be reported. Force is not defined in the legislation. It also is not defined in the Maryland Police Training Commission's best practices document. It's not defined in the Attorney General's document that they gave us, a guidance document. That document tells us these are definitely force, and these may or may not be force. So we had to try to figure out how would we come to a definition of force that was defendable. So what we did was, after we had consulted those documents, consulted with the state's attorney's office, and we started looking at what do we do with other crimes. So what is the understanding of force when it comes to a robbery or a sexual assault? And that type of definition of force, and how do we apply that to our officers when they're using force? As a result of all of that, that's where we came up with this definition and the exceptions. The reason it's important also is because in the past, the department had a use of force policy, and we had certain reporting criteria. When you would talk to an officer and you would say, hey, you had to grab the gentleman by the arm and move him out of the way, that's the use of force, they would respond to you and they would say it's not a use of force, it's not reportable, because under our policy in the past, you taking somebody by the arm when you needed to, legally and lawfully, and escorting them was not a reportable use of force. So that was a mindset change. We had to explain to them that, yes, in the past we had reportable uses of force, but now all force is going to be reported. So that's kind of where we're going with that. So we say that force is any execution of a physical act to control a person, overcome resistance, or defend oneself or another. Force may entail the use of body parts, issued departmental equipment, or an instrument of necessity. Exceptions. The following acts do not constitute a use of force. So these are the things that we're saying that they do regularly, that they come in contact with folks, but we don't consider them to be a use of force. Escorting or touching a subject or arrestee with minimal or no resistance to ensure officer safety or the safety of others, or to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. The examples for that is carrying out the duties and responsibilities of a law enforcement officer. We also do not consider routine handcuffing or similar restraints with minimal or no resistance, or displays of an officer's authority to use force without the physical use of force. So in speaking with it, I'm looking at the law requires the reporting of uses of force, not necessarily the threat to use force. So, is there anyone who has any questions on that one? Okay. So as we go down through, instrument of necessity is basically, sometimes as an officer, you'll find yourself in a position where it's not necessarily an issued piece of equipment that you would use, but you may need to use it to defend yourself. And examples they give there are flashlights and footballs. This definition here is neck restraint, and this is important because later on in the policy, we're going to say that neck restraints are considered deadly force and are prohibited unless you have a deadly force situation, and then justification is based solely at the person who's using the neck restraint is responsible for the justification of that. And then serious physical injury is also important because that's when you're looking at, you can use the higher levels of force, such as deadly force, when you're looking at serious physical injury or death. So going down, we added probably the first stop point there. It's all blue. That is all members must recognize and act upon their duty to intervene and report uses of force that are inconsistent with the law and the department's policy. So we already had a duty to intervene policy, but this was just moving that policy into this section so that it's in the use of force area and the officers are familiar with it. The second part here is getting to the reporting process. So the following documents have to be completed prior to the end of the officer's tour of duty for all incidents involving a use of force. So if they use force, the first thing that has to be done prior to the end of the tour of duty is the police report. So if it's a shoplifting, if it's a domestic, whatever the original offense is, that report is to be completed. The next thing is the 253, which is our use of force report, and we'll be giving you a copy of that. They're required to do that. That's actually to comply with part of the state law that says prior to the end of an officer's tour of duty, they must complete a report if they have used force. So we use the 253 to do that. The third thing is the written narrative documents. That's complying also with the new law, which says that if an officer was involved in, so if you witness it, if you have information that could contribute to the evaluation of it, you're required to do written documentation prior to the end of your shift. Now, this is where when we get to talking about, I had said about formatting earlier, we have exceptions in our policy, and the exceptions, basically what dot point they line up or what number they line up is the applicable one. So you see how these line up. Later in other formats, other sections as you're looking, you may see an exception or a note that goes all the way out. And then that applies to all of the items above it, just for the future. So the Form 253, there are two exceptions when an officer would not do that prior to going home. The first one being is when they're doing a use of force report, Form 12L. And that's because the incident's being investigated by the Criminal Investigations Bureau or other investigating unit. So what that means is this is going to be a unit where somebody has been seriously injured, and now we have a investigation that's being done by either our folks or an outside agency. In those cases, they're going to go ahead and do the Form 12L, which is it has the mandated blocks that are required by the state to be completed before the officers end of their tour duty, but it doesn't have the detail that is on the 253. Going down to the related narrative documents, you see the exceptions there. So if you're doing the 12L, you're not going to do your narrative document. You're going to wait to do your narrative documents after you've spoke with the investigating units and completed that. The next one is if the member wants to talk to an attorney. So we gave them the ability of, before you do a written explanation as to what you did, what you saw, if they want to speak with an attorney, they can not do the narrative before they leave for that day. We do have that they are to try to get that narrative done within 72 hours. The next one would be that the shift unit commander has said that you can go back in service. And the reason for this is if you were to have a very large incident where all of your officers or a large number of your officers were involved in this, you still need people to go back out and still go to calls for service. So in this case, the officers who just observed or have information to contribute, not the officer who used force, they are allowed, the shift commander can say, I need to get you back in service, go back in service, and then get those narratives done within the next 72 hours. The last one you see here is to deal with folks whenever they're off duty. So if they happen to be off duty, there was no element in the law that said on duty, off duty. So they're required to do a document even if they are off duty. So that requires them to do it whenever they get back to work the next time. So that's what that section's all about. So then this next section is the part that Captain Trivett was speaking about earlier, which is all use of force require a supervisory review, a command level review, and a review by the internal affairs section. Now, what we have there for the notes is the supervisor and commander, if you're the one using force, you're not allowed to do your own review. So that's what that first note is about. And then the second one is the exception, which Captain Trivett was talking about earlier, which is I was going to explain this in the next section, is we now have two levels of use of force reporting. I guess we can call it a lower and an upper level. The lower level does not get the IA review unless something comes out during the earlier review or it's a use of force, some type of a use of force violation is identified. So this heading here, which says use of force requiring a use of force packet. This is, and the next two that are on the next page, are what in the past our officers traditionally knew as a use of force. This is what they completed documentation for, and this is what our numbers, our use of force historical numbers are based on. So as we were trying to figure out how we wanted to comply with this law, we wanted to be able to still come back to this information. So what we did was we kept this as our upper level use of force. So these are the ones that require more documentation, that require more review. And then we have the lower level uses of force, which are the more minor ones, which don't require as much review, don't require as much documentation. So that last exception that I was speaking about If you are dealing with a use of force that requires a use of force packet, one of these 5, it's going to go through your supervisor, your precinct command. It's going to make its way up to Captain Trivett's folks. It's even going to make it up to the division commander, your division commander, before it goes to Captain Trivett. And they're all going to take a look at it. If it's one of these more minor uses of force that is not, then we're only going to do the use of force form and the narratives. It goes up through the officer's chain of command up to the precinct captain. And if the precinct captain is fine with it, at that point we feel that it's good and there's no further review for that incident. What this allows us to do is we know that our use of force numbers are going to go up greatly due to the expanded criteria. But this should allow us to be able to look at our numbers historically and say, has the number of use of force that we tracked in the past, the number that required a packet in the past will be the number that require a packet moving forward. So, if you go up for me just one second. Yes, oh, yeah. As you're reviewing our documents, this note here may also be of use to you. So we also say that for these lower level uses of force, they're doing our Form 253 and they're doing the narrative documents. We also wanted them to be able to do photographs. Photographs are traditionally considered part of the higher level use of force. So we wanted them to be able to take photographs to show the minor nature or the serious, the minor nature, the circumstances, such as, what went on, without being required to do an entire use of force packet just because they wanted to show minor. So that's what this does. It would be possible for you all to get a use of force in where it's not an entire packet. But it may have photographs with it. So the first part there, sworn members shall take reasonable steps to gain compliance and de-escalate without using physical force when time, circumstances, and safety allow. So that's going to be required. That's in the law. It requires us to use de-escalation techniques. These next ones shall take reasonable alternatives are those that are able to achieve the same end safely and effectively. That came from our review of the AGs. That's what they consider to be reasonable alternatives. This doesn't require the member to jeopardize their own safety by pursuing alternatives that are not reasonable under the totality of the circumstances. So we give them examples there as amounts of time the member has to make the decision, the immediacy of the threat facing the officer, etc. So when you all are reviewing our policies, just for our format, when you see EG with etc., that's going to mean that it's a open example. There may be others. When we use IE, that's a closed example. So those are the ones that we believe apply. Going down, there's this is the document also requiring utilize de-escalation techniques along with their training, which is the ICAT model. When safe and practical, do so to ensure they're communicating, reassessing the situation, and using the best tactics to diffuse or stabilize the situation so that more time, options, and resources may be available to gain voluntary compliance and reduce or eliminate the need to use force. So we're explaining to them what's expected of them. Use the least amount of force that is necessary and proportional. That's the new state standard to safely control a situation. The next dot point, they are not required to confront an adversary without having an advantage. Officers need the ability to disengage or escalate to a higher force option to escape injury or maintain control. So the next blue dot point you see is it reflects the new state use of force law. This is when officers are allowed to use force. So we've turned it to that they will not use force against a person unless under the totality of the circumstances the force is necessary and proportional to prevent an imminent threat of physical injury to that person or to effectuate a legitimate law enforcement objective. That phrase also caused us some discussion because legitimate law enforcement objective is not defined anywhere that we could locate it. So basically, the best that we could come up with was explaining to the officers that this is doing what the department expects of you as a police officer. And you'll see that it's repeated a couple of times in the policy. So the notes for this: force is not necessary unless there is no reasonable alternative to using force that under the totality of the circumstances would safely and effectively achieve the same legitimate ends. When determining whether to use force or continue using force, officers shall take into consideration all information known regarding the subject and circumstances, including the severity of the crime, the threat posed by the individual to the safety of the officer or other people, and whether the subject is trying to flee or resist arrest. Must evaluate the immediate circumstances and use only the force necessary and proportional for the situation. So again, we're telling them back to the state standard. The next notes there: the sworn members will continuously assess the situation and change their response as the situation changes. This number 3 that we have here is highlighted. This also came from the AGs. That even though we're providing this information to them, this does not mean that the sworn member must utilize the exact same type, degree, or amount of force as the subject. They're not restricted that way. This is the next stop point is our deadly force stop point. We'll not use deadly force unless deadly force is necessary and proportional to protect others and or the members themselves from imminent danger of death or serious physical injury, and all other alternatives have been exhausted or unreasonable in light of the circumstances. So that keeps us in compliance with the law. The next stop point there is the one that I spoke about earlier with neck restraints. So neck restraints are prohibited from the use of neck restraints unless the use of deadly force is permitted, as stated above, and justification for the use of a neck restraint rests solely on that member. In keeping with the state law, shall fully document all uses of force they use and all uses of force that they observe. Example, see, hear, etc. Or have pertinent information related to the review of or placing a written narrative, related to the review of by placing a written narrative detailing their observations or involvement in the incident in the appropriate incident report. So what we've told the folks for in the report writing system that we have, let's say that, for instance, Chief Delp is the primary and he writes it, and he's the one using force, and the captain and Ms. Ferguson and I are the ones observing it. So he would write the report. He would include in his report his justification for it. We would then write related reports to his, explaining what we had saw, what the documentation. So it's all contained within our report writing system. Let's see here. So then the next thing we wanted to say was we wanted to remind them that this includes when a member observed or has information pertinent to the review of the use of force by a department member that occurred outside of the state of Maryland. So it is possible, especially for our Precinct 7 folks, to find themselves across the line. If they should find themselves across the line, we still expect our department members to make that report. The other thing is they also, law enforcement officers from other jurisdictions that occur in the state of Maryland. So if our officer happens to be riding down 83 and sees a state trooper, we expect them to do a narrative in reference to what they saw. If they happen to see Anne Arundel County, same, any law enforcement officer. The last thing that you see there, that number 2, is basically for Captain Trivett's internal, and that's in our report writing system. You select yes. Next to was a use of force form completed, and that ensures that that incident's flagged for his folks. Sworn members using force, The first dot point comes from the state law as well. Shall cease the use of force as soon as the person on whom the force is used is under the sworn member's control or no longer poses an imminent threat of physical injury or death to the sworn member or to another person, or the sworn member determines that the force will no longer accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. And that's where you see that phrase again. We added a note for clarification to our folks. It says sworn members are reminded that in addition to the top provisions outlined in the Maryland Use of Force statute, they are required to cease the use of force when they have determined that under the totality of the circumstances, the force is no longer necessary and proportional to prevent an imminent threat of physical injury to a person or effectuate a legitimate law enforcement objective. The next one is as a result of the state law and the smart policing, which requires they shall render basic first aid to persons injured as a result of police action and promptly request appropriate medical assistance. Shall be consistent with their training, and this will include a request for emergency medical assistance for any person in police custody with an obvious injury or complaint of injury. The first dot point here is important that they notify, so they have to immediately notify their supervisor. And that's because the new law put certain requirements on the supervisor that the supervisor has to do. So the supervisor is relying on the officer to inform them that the use of force happened so that they can come out and do their requirements that are required by the law. So that includes if they're in another jurisdiction. And if the member does not have an on-duty supervisor, they will notify, and if their supervisor, their chain of command is not working, they're to notify an on-duty working supervisor. Going down through, complete and submit a 253, which is a use of force report prior to the end of their tour duty, to document all force used. And the idea of that example there is we want to remind them that we now have two levels of force. We have use of force that requires use of force packet and use of force that does not require use of force packet. Then we have the exceptions again, which, so the first one is the firearms discharge. So firearms discharge, which is in Article 12 also, but it's Section 7, has the same. So if an officer was to fire their weapon and injure somebody or kill them, they do not do the 253 prior to going home. They do that pre-printed 12L that I discussed earlier that is for the more serious uses of force. So if you go to Article 12, Section 7, you'll see that process is the same in both of these sections. The next one, that's that same process that we spoke about earlier where CIB or another investigating unit is conducting the investigation. That also is when they're going to go ahead and do that 12L, or when the member is injured. So you can't do the 12L, you can't do the 253 if you don't have the ability to do it. So that gives them the ability to not do it. When using force, other than firearms, results in serious physical injury or death. And so this is the part that requires them to submit that 12L. If they have one of these higher level uses of force or firearms discharge, they'll do the 12L. They'll put no further details in the 12L. And that exception to that is if they're injured, they're not going to be able to do the 12L that day. They'll have to do it later. They will not write any statements or complete any administrative forms until after being interviewed by the investigating CIB entity or other unit. And we tend to be very particular in our policies as far as, I know some of our exceptions you may be like, well, that only applies like very, very small amount of times. But when we say that we don't want them writing any statements or anything, we will then follow it up with an exception that says, well, you can go ahead and do that 12L that we require. So that's what that exception is about. And then there's a remain in the clothing they were in at the time, the use of force until the supervisor and investigating entity or a member of the other investigating unit arrives to ensure photographs of the member's appearance are taken. We did add, again, an exception kind of the same, which is we have to allow them, if they have some type of like biohazard or stuff like that, they would be allowed to remove their clothing. And then when that process is done, or the 12L, they still have to complete the Form 253 for Captain Trivett's folks for the data collection, and they do that within 30 days. So doing a 12L does not mean that you're never going to do a 253. It just delays it. So then we have placed a written narrative detailing the de-escalation use of force actions and justification in the appropriate incident report. These notes are again to remind them of the information that they should be placing in. So all sworn members using force shall ensure that the narrative includes a full explanation of any attempts to de-escalate the situation and or reasons that de-escalation techniques were not appropriate, i.e. the reason they were not reasonable in light of the circumstance of the incident, the imminent threat of physical injury or the use of force was aimed at preventing, and the legitimate law enforcement objective. The circumstances used to determine that the use of force was necessary and proportional. Note, relevant items to document include information known regarding the subject circumstances, including the severity of the crime, if that threat posed by the individual to the safety of the officer or others, and whether the subject is trying to flee or resist. They also want them to include the reason the use of force was ceased. Subject was under the member's control. Subject no longer posed an imminent threat, physical injury, or death to the member or another person. The member determined that the force would no longer accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. Force was no longer necessary and proportional. Sworn members will obtain the names, identification number, and employing agency of law enforcement officers from other jurisdictions observing their use of force when practicable, and include the information in their incident report. So we want to make sure that we know who else may have information to contribute to the review. So now the supervisor gets the information. So the first thing they have to do is, under the law, they are required, they shall respond to the scene of any incident during which an officer used, under their supervision, used force that results in serious physical injury or death. So if it's a serious physical injury or death, they're required under the use of force statute to respond. Note, when the member's supervisor is unavailable to respond, they will ensure that an appropriate supervisor is assigned to respond to the place. So for instance, if I happen to be Ms. Ferguson's supervisor and I am not available, I would have to find another sergeant and say, Officer Ferguson had a use of force, I need you to respond in my place. So the supervisors for all use of force incident gather and review all known reportings. That also is coming from the state law. So the examples we use that for there are body-worn camera footage, security footage, etc., prior to the review and endorsement of the 253 and related documentation. So we want them to gather it, which is required by law. We also want them to review it prior to approving the report. Going down through notes, supervisors will not seize recording devices used by citizens except as described in Field Manual, Article 7, Section 13.0. So what that is about is years ago, you might have remember seeing in the headlines and that, where people would take people's cell phones and it causes problems. That section of our Field Manual basically explains that if you are going to see somebody's cell phone, then you better be willing to get a search warrant to get the material out of it. If you're not willing to do a search warrant, then you should not be seizing that device. So that's what that reference is. Ensure that a sufficient portion of the videos are reviewed to accurately make an assessment of whether the use of force was properly documented and whether there are potential use of force violations. This also might strike as odd at first, but for some of these larger situations where you have multiple officers and you have cameras running for extended periods of time, we didn't want to tell supervisors, and then later on you'll see it under the other commanders, that you have to watch
every minute of the video because there's hours and hours and hours. And if it's clear that either what you're seeing is not consistent with our policy, or if it's clear that what you are seeing is consistent, we didn't want you to have to say that you had reviewed it just to say that it was done. So what we asked them is that they have to review a portion of the video that they can establish for themselves whether it's an in policy or out of policy use of force. The next thing is that create a case folder is just, what that does is when you create a case folder in our body-worn camera system, once a video is in a case folder, it's protected from deletion. Documents are completed, and then they review and endorse the 253 and the related documents. And then they have 14 days to get that 253 from the command up to Captain Trivett's folks. If they, during their review, if a potential use of force violation is identified during the review investigation, the first thing we want them to do is consult with their shift unit commander to see. We want to make sure that the supervisors are having discussions back and forth. Not all of our supervisors have the same experience. Not all of our supervisors have the same knowledge, have been assigned to the same positions. So this gets a discussion going to decide whether what the concerns that the supervisor has are valid or not. If they have concerns, they complete a 12L and they attach that 12L to the use of force report. And then again, they're making sure in the reporting system the yes is selected so that Captain Trivett's folks know that that incident has a use of force report associated with it. Going down under shift unit commanders.
Vince, can you just explain real briefly what the public safety statement is?
So public safety statements are basically after these critical incidents, when the supervisor, the shift commander go out, it's you're going out and you are asking the officer for information about what happened. They're very specific and laid out in the policy, the questions that you're asking. And it's basically, you're asking questions to get information for the department to respond to the situation without violating the officer's Miranda warnings. So you're asking, what direction did they go? Who did they fire? But you're not asking details. It's a very limited, specific set of questions that you're asking, and that's what the balancing act is. You're balancing the department's need to respond to the situation with the officer's Miranda rights and the possible, if you got information, that it could be seen as a violation of Miranda.
And the safety of the public. So are there suspects outstanding? Are there weapons outstanding? So there's specific questions. Did you fire your weapon? Approximately how many times did the suspect fire? What direction? How many rounds did they fire? Was anyone injured? Are you aware of any unsecured weapons? Are suspects outstanding? What are their descriptions of any witnesses? Does any evidence need protection? So we ask them very prescribed questions in order to ensure their safety and public safety and any citizens involved.
So now we're coming down to the shift commander's responsibilities in the policy. This is going to be the lieutenant that Captain Trivett was speaking about. So they are to immediately notify the precinct commander of the precinct where the incident occurred, and if different, the commander or the member involved when a use of force requiring a use of force packet has occurred. So the more minor uses of force, they're not going to make notification on that. The captain may not have knowledge of that until the paperwork comes up. But these more serious uses of force, they're going to be getting those. Immediate notification, they'll know that this incident has occurred. Going on down through, if force results in serious physical injury, contact the bureau chief of CIB by their chain of command to determine regarding which section or unit within CIB will complete criminal investigation where a criminal investigation is required. This dot point is basically speaking with Captain Trivett. His folks are doing the administrative investigation. We know that the IID comes in for certain investigations.
We know that our homicide unit does certain investigations. But there were incidents that kind of fall in between all of those. And what this dot point does is it gives our CID bureau chief the chance to say, do I want to have an entity within the department do a criminal investigation as in addition to the administrative investigation that Captain Trivett's folks are doing. So that's what that dot point is about. When the use of force requires a use of force packet, they have to ensure that photographs are taken. If photographs are not taken, they ensure that reasonable attempts are made, and an explanation for the lack of photographs is documented in the use of force packet. They also are reviewing and endorsing the 253 on reviewing the recordings and related narratives. They are under the same standard as far as reviewing a sufficient portion of the videos to allow them to make a determination. And they also are required to make sure that it gets to Captain Trivett's folks within 14 days. When they do have a incident that requires a use of force packet, there's the officers, they're getting narrative statements from the officer using force or witnesses or other officers, victims, when applicable. The exception there, when written summaries of uses of force where an unusual occurrence will not be completed. What we're talking about there is there's a list of items that as a department we have identified as unusual occurrences. They're generally incidents where people were seriously physically injured, where the department may have liability. And in those cases, Captain Trivett's folks do the administrative investigation. So if you have an unusual occurrence and Captain Trivett's folks are doing the unusual occurrence investigation, then the precinct's not going to be doing all this documentation because it'll be done by Captain Trivett's folks as part of their investigation. So then we also have the shift commander will complete a 12L if potential use of force policy violations were identified during the review of the forms 253 or related documentation, and they will attach it. And then the complete a blue team entry, that's the system that we use for complaints. So they're going to put the 12L as an attachment, and that's if they see a potential policy violation or if the use of force was in violation. The 8 items that you see there, they are not highlighted. That it was in the past, and that continues to be what we require them to put in a use of force packet. So if you see a use of force packet, that's what will be in it when it comes to you. It then goes to the precinct section commander. The precinct section commander is reviewing and endorsing the 253 and related recordings, related narratives. They also are required to review the videos to make their determination, and they have to get the 253 up to internal affairs also in 14 days. If a 12L was done, they make sure that that was forwarded to Captain Trivett's folks. They review completed use of force packets and attach written documentation of the review. So the precinct commander and the shift commander they're doing these written documentation. Part of the law was that we needed to have a documented review. So that's making sure that we remain in compliance with that part of the law. Let's see here. If violations are present, consult with the division commander, the bureau executive officer, and IAS to determine what investigation action is warranted. That's because generally in our discipline system, your captain is the one who's coordinates any type of discipline. So if I am assigned to Chief Delp's precinct, he would speak with Captain Trivett. They would coordinate to decide on any type of discipline. So that's why you see the captain being involved there. So the precinct commander is also forwarding the 253 out within 14 days. The items that you see there, number 3, were just added to clarify what our steps are that we take after after a member's been involved in one of the very serious uses of force where somebody is either injured, potentially where there could be death could be involved. The last one we have there under the precinct commander is contact the IAS for instruction if a non-sworn member uses force. So we do have some crime lab folks that the department has trained in the use of spray. They carry their spray, so they're not considered sworn officers under the statute, so this process does not apply to them. So the division commanders, they're reviewing completed use of force packet. They're reviewing anything that has a use of force packet attached to it, or if there were potential use of force violations. They're going up to the division commander. You can remember that the lower level ones that did not require use of force packet have stopped at the captain. There's no further review after the captain. So they forward completed use of force packets within 14 days to IAS. The only exception, well, it's not exception, it's a note there, is that if they see something that is very serious to them concerning, they take it to the bureau chief to make sure that that colonel of that bureau is aware before it goes over to IAS. The training section dot points there were the requirements in the law, so that's what was required for our training. So we're in compliance with that, but we did add it here to reflect the law. This is Captain Trivett's folks. So they are reviewing. Sorry.
Sheets of overall.
So Captain Trivett's folks are reviewing when a use of force packet is required, where there's a potential violation. And then that last blue area up there was, we also placed into the policy an auditing program. So they pulled 10 of the lower level uses of force that were reviewed only by the precinct captain, and Internal Affairs takes a look at them to make sure that they were correctly evaluated and that they were handled correctly. So that's an auditing process that we've placed in there. And that's pretty much it for that section. So, do you want me to explain how we complied with this as far as the training and how we sent it out, and distributed it, or?
Sure. I think our part of what we're presenting is sort of how we have explained this and trained our officers.
So once we had developed this process and we had sent it out internally, we get reviews internally from the command. We get input from the Fraternal Order of Police. We get it from all the executive board. My folks take that together and we evaluate it. We make revisions to it. Once we have a final policy that is signed by the chief, we have to get that out to folks immediately. And our system of manuals, we have general orders that go out periodically, but they don't go out in a timely fashion to allow us to get this out to members quickly. So what we use is what we call a DL police message. It goes to all members' email accounts, and it tells them, hey, this policy is in effect now. And then we follow that up with what we call a written form 159, and that requires them to initial. So even if they didn't check their email and they did not see the original message, they would be notified the next day they went into work. They would see, hey, I'm initialing that there's a new use of force policy, and there's a copy of it in my email. So that was how we put it out to them. There was actually 3 messages that were involved in this process. The first one was the sanctity of life message. So, So as part of this law, all sworn members of the police department had to sign a sanctity of life pledge. This was the distribution message that we put out on May 5th, and it told them about the pledge, what the pledge was, and that they would be using a very specific version of the 159 to sign for it. So that was our way of complying with that law.
I want to make sure that, could you all see that on the screen at home or off-site? Did you all see that, the sanctity of life?
The letter, yes, we were able to see that. Now we are not. It's switched over to the main, the share screen.
So you saw this?
Yes, I can see that now. Yep.
Okay, did you see it before?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good.
So all of our members had to sign that. We knew that it had to be in place by July 1st. So we had, by May 1st, we began that process of getting those all signed. We took care of the officers that were all in the precincts and out in CIB. And now we've set up the process to have it signed in the academy for the folks coming in. So we'll have those for everyone, continuing into the future. So that was one of the messages that we had to do in reference to this law revision. If you could pull up the DL police.
Mouse, very finicky.
Get back to the should say DL police use of force. This is the training one. That's fine. If you did it, that's fine. Okay. This is the use of force training completion document. So as part of the state law, it said that prior to July 1st, we had to have all of our members sign a statement saying that they understood that they had been trained in the Maryland use of force statute, the new law. So this was the message that we put out to folks. We explained to them the materials that we had provided. We had already provided the revised policy. We had provided the informer that we're going to give you a copy of. We had provided the video. We had also provided a list of documented trainings from the training section that explained to them when they had the training that was required by the state statute. So in order to remain certified, this message said, okay, you've got the policy, you've got what's required, we now need you to sign so that you keep your certification. That's what this message here was. And then the final one, which actually went out before that, is this one here. What this message is this went out, they're on June 14th. So that gave them approximately 2 to 3 weeks where they could tell them that the use of force policy had changed and that they had that time to review it, educate themselves on it, go over the materials and process it so that they would be able to sign that training completion document and remain certified.
Video.
Yeah, I guess we should. This is the video that our training section put out and gave to the officers.
Hi everyone, I'm Sergeant Owen Watson with the Firearms Training Team. This video is to update everyone on the new State of Maryland use of force statutes set to take effect on July 1 of this year. Our current use of force policy is consistent with the new statutes. However, there are new reporting requirements for officers using and witnessing use of force incidents. The new statute requires all sworn members to report any use of force incident they witness or in which they become involved. Contrary to what you may have heard, although all uses of force must now be reported, not all forms of touching are a use of force. For example, the following are not considered uses of force: escorting or touching a subject or arrestee with minimal or no resistance to ensure officer safety, the safety of others, or to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. These objectives include, but are not limited to, arrest, investigative detention, protection of oneself or others from bodily injury, preservation of the peace, and preservation or recovery of evidence. Routine handcuffing and displays of force are also not uses of force. A show of force may include drawing or displaying a weapon such as OC spray, gas baton, the taser, or even a firearm. Red dot or arc compliance with the taser also fall into this category. The intentional discharge or use of any weapon, regardless of the injury, obviously constitutes a use of force and must be reported. Let's take a look at a couple of scenarios that illustrate actions that are considered uses of force, and then some actions that are not considered uses of force. In this first scenario, the officers are executing an arrest warrant.
Sir, you're under arrest for an outstanding warrant.
The subject initially complies, but begins to offer some noticeable resistance.
What am I getting locked up for? Relax.
The primary officer tightens his grip and transitions to a single wing control hold.
You're gonna be okay. Yes. Okay.
The officer immediately begins dialogue and tells the subject to relax and asks if he's going to be okay. The subject stops moving and is handcuffed. This is not a use of force. The resistance is minimal, and once the subject was told what to do, he complies. In a similar situation, we will show how the scene could escalate to a use of force. The officer is unable to quickly get control of the subject and must take him to the ground to stop the resistance. This would be considered more than minimal resistance, and the act of taking him to the ground would be considered a use of force. It should also be noted that once the subject stops resisting and is under control, the officer's use of force must also stop.
Always talking trash.
In this next scenario, officers respond to a possible domestic incident where subjects can be heard arguing inside the apartment.
Why? All the time.
The officers separate the subjects in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. The subjects attempt to move around the officers, requiring them to put their hands out, touching the subject's chest to keep them from getting around the officer. The subjects stop moving and are told to stay where they are. The contacts between the officer and the subjects were minimal. This is not a use of force.
You don't pay any bills?
In a similar domestic incident, the officers use physical guidance and safe separation tactics, which are successful in de-escalating the aggressive behavior of one of the brothers. The second brother continues to escalate to the point of assaulting the officer. This would be considered more than minimal resistance, and the act of pushing the aggressor off balance would be considered a use of force.
Don't you move.
In this final scene, officers respond to a local bar for an intoxicated subject refusing to leave.
You called the police? What's going on
Yeah,
tonight?
he always had too many. He's bothering customers.
What's your name, sir?
It's Eric.
Eric, come on. They want you to go ahead and leave. You need to tell Eric he needs to leave in my presence?
Yeah, Eric, it's time to go.
Alright, come on, Eric. We'll get you a ride. We'll call somebody for you.
Okay.
To minimize the risk of injury, physical guidance is used to escort the subject from the premises by holding his upper arm and wrist. This is not a use of force.
Get your ride home.
Okay. One more drink.
Looking at a similar incident in the bar, the individual is advised to leave.
Eric, they want you to
One more
leave.
drink.
However, the individual is not compliant and becomes physically and verbally defiant.
Eric, you gotta leave. Yo, I want one more drink.
Eric.
Officers begin the verbal and physical guidance tactics, which immediately fail.
No!
In response, officers are compelled to change their tactics by escalating to control holds and joint manipulation in order to overcome the resistance. This becomes a use of force. Obviously, we cannot cover every situation. As you know, each call will be different. If you're unsure about whether your actions constitute a use of force, consult a supervisor and they will guide you in the right direction. Range staff will be conducting annual refresher training on our use of force policy and the reporting changes mandated by the state beginning in July during phase 2 of in-service at the range.
So the actual video was not as herky-jerky. There's something about piping it to the moon and back to show it on the WebEx that did that, but I think you get the material.
And then we'll leave you a copy of the Informer. It's basically the Informer is an educational document for our officers. It kind of takes the dot points that were in the policy and puts it out in more sentence format. And we'll let you have a copy of that so that you can read over it. If you have any questions, you can let us know.
The mouse ran away.
So this will be an interesting year, the next year, because generally speaking, we have like 190, 200 uses of forces generally out of probably, 20 to 30,000 arrests in an average year. But this year we're probably going to have more numbers from this insignificant, smaller uses of force. We will have a higher documented uses of forces, but we will be able to parse out whether the significant use of forces are and the less significant uses of forces. And we will be able to gauge that barometer based on what we're reporting for apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So we're kind of like in a first inaugural year of seeing how it plays out with the non-compliance rate and when we have to go hands-on at some point.
And the preliminary statistics for the first 9 months, we compared to the first 9 months for the last 6 years. Because we know 2020 and 2021 were kind of odd years to compare anything to with COVID. So I wanted to go back, and our use of force, our packet level are actually lower than they were in 2017, 2018, 2019. They're lower than every year except for 2021. 2021, I would suggest it's not a good mechanism to track. That's just, those are the statistics, and I think the de-escalation training and communication are working because our arrests are back up. So our arrests are up this year compared to what they were in years past, but our use of force is lower. So that's, I think it's a positive step for the department.
So is that is within the new reporting requirements that's lower?
So yes, the reporting, the full packet level. So the other ones, we don't have a statistical reference point.
Sure.
So we're compiling those numbers, and we have to do our review, like Rich was saying, our statistical review of those 10 packets to make sure before we finalize the statistics. So those will be, we'll have year over year from this point forward, starting in July of 2022 when went into effect. So after July of this year, then we'll be able to compare July to August. So we're just coming for the lower level uses of force, the review of coming up.
There's a lot of the lower level force was documented. The department has always documented a lot of what happens in incidents in the reports, and there might have been a description of someone being taken to the ground. And of course, our body-worn camera has been documenting those incidents and those actions, but we weren't statistically capturing them in the way that we have now, all agencies are now required to start doing that statistical capture.
It may have been relevant in like resisting arrest or something like that. So we would have documented that, you refused to get out of the seat and had to be pulled up, or whatever it is. So it would be documented, but just wouldn't be captured statistically speaking as use of force because it didn't meet our definition of what's required to be reported as use of force.
Any more questions?
So how have the changes been received by the line officers? I mean, I know obviously you guys are upset, but
Generally speaking, it's another form, and as with anything, when you add administrative housekeeping documents and things to fill out. Originally, obviously, everybody's like another form to fill out, but you get used to it, and then it just becomes the norm. So very quickly, when you have to fill out a form, it becomes part of the deal of what you do. So, but just from a psychological factor, those lesser uses of force are just not necessarily just looking at it as a use of force, but that is could be a proper de-escalation that kept it from becoming a more significant use of force. So those are, in essence, in a nuanced way, they could be a win in some situations because it was something that we didn't capture. We didn't know what we didn't know before, but we are capturing those lesser uses of force. But in essence, those are captured wins where they were properly de-escalated that didn't get to the point of a significant use of force. So it's framing and how you look at it from a non-compliant situation and how effectively officers are dealing with them and documenting and showing the insignificant uses of forces when you go hands-on, but you're successful in keeping it from getting out of control.
And I think there was some uncertainty with what is the law, what is use of force, what requires to be reported. And when we went through and showed them all the things that we have been consistently doing, and then we've had training on de-escalation, we've used scenario-based training, which is required in the law now. We've used that for forever. Again, in my 28 years, we've used it every year as scenario-based with role players. Now we have some the interactive versions that we're able to supplement that with. So we've been doing many of the things which the law now required, but we're ahead of the curve in many facets. Other agencies, as the Internal Affairs Commander, I talked with my counterparts, and many other agencies have asked us, what are you doing with the use of force thing? What are we doing? So we have been a model agency in many respects to implementing changes.
The other thing that we did to try to prevent resistance was we had all the lieutenants came in, and the lieutenants are in charge of the shifts. They're the supervisor that the officers are used to speaking with their supervisors, and then their lieutenants. We brought all the lieutenants in, and all the lieutenants went to a presentation It's very similar to what I gave to you all, and we explained to them, they know what the current policy is. And our objective for that is if we could make sure that the sergeant, that the lieutenants understood it, the lieutenants can pass it to the sergeants, corporals, and there'll be more understanding, and hopefully with the more understanding, less fear.
Correct. Yeah, and in addition to that, another layer just to add is we did it with all the lieutenants in the entire police department, but we also brought the executive corps members, the captains, and majors, and colonels, and we also did an overlay of, obviously from an expectation standpoint, with the entire executive corps as well, because they're going to be the ones, the captains of the precincts, and the commanders are going to be that final review on the lesser uses of forces. So they obviously are the stopping point and conduit for that, and then obviously the other ones will still continue and go to the captain of internal affairs. But from a consistency and kind of a flat kind of situation for the significant uses of forces, like was stated, we've always done verbal judo classes, communication skills, de-escalation measures, on hands, like scenario-based training. So we've been doing that consistently, and we stepped it up probably around 2016-ish, based on some recommendations. We actually added to and supplemented even more de-escalation skills and overall perspectives on handling things, and guidelines. So our statistics on those significant uses of forces, I suspect, will remain pretty steady because we've throughout the decades have consistently done well in that category as far as de-escalation training and communication training. It's just now those smaller ones.
While there may be another form to fill out, and that perception that here's another form to fill out, do you find that there is an overall appreciation for having these matters documented for everyone's protection, for the officers involved as well as the public, and administratively being able to have a better picture, more accurate picture of what's actually going on?
Absolutely, that's a great point. And some of the things that we talk about with the officers is it really does document non-compliance and patterns within society as far as civility and as far as compliance with the officers. And it really documents in the big scheme of things the difficult job that the officers have to do, because it shows the level and the amount of people that from a low level situation we have to try to exert in a calculated fashion to try to keep things and kind of think for sometimes you have to think for other people. Sometimes you have to think through that moment and see through that moment and think for someone else in it that's obviously in an emotional state and letting the emotion override the intellect, if you will. So yes, I think it's good because it, like I said, it shows the level of de-escalation that happens and gives you a barometer of how many times obviously people in a irritated or agitated kind of frame of reference don't comply initially, and then we overcome that easily.
These reports are on those computer systems that the cruisers, the cruisers that these guys drive.
Yes.
These reports are on that computer system that's sitting there. I had my ride along.
Yeah, okay.
Good. It's like a rolling office.
Yeah, so they can right out the internet, they sit right there and enter the report.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And that's a statistical capture, so it's, inside or outside, time of day, that kind of stuff. So there's no narrative describing that. That belongs in the incident report or police report. So we wanted to capture two different ways, so that we have a statistical form, and that at some point, that the statistical information may be able to be electronically done. We're not quite there yet. We still do it paper form.
Yeah, and it captures obviously demographic, like the form captures demographic information and types of use of force and de-escalation measures that did work, de-escalation measures that did not work, and it shows the progression. It can show the progressions of multiple uses of force occurred, and kind of shows it on the continuum of how the event unfolded. But the particulars from a narrative-based description, storytelling, it operates under the police report, so you don't have two different documents saying the same thing.
Well, Chief, we want to thank you and everyone today for this wonderful presentation. I think, as I said earlier, it's a matter and a subject that everyone in the community is concerned about and wants to know more about and appreciates learning more about it so that we understand it better for ourselves and for the officers involved and for the department as well. So thank you all for coming and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
gonna go right into our old business.
You want to?
Feel free. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you, sir. So we're gonna go right into our old business on the, as noted on the agenda, and we have a few important updates. We know that District 5 is vacant, and Henry will give us the update on that and also regarding our District 6.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So with District 5, of course, that position has been vacant for several months. We have conducted internal interviews. The county executive has chosen a nominee for that spot. That individual's name and information will be made public when they're placed officially on the county council agenda. But we're very much looking forward for that person to join the board so we can, again, get close to a full roster, and hopefully that individual will be on board by April. That would be, again, hopefully our goal.
We also want to address our ACC designee position. As a result of our member Jake stepping down from the ACC designee position, we solicited the board and solicited those who were interested in being considered for the appointment to fill it. And we're pleased to announce that Dawn has graciously accepted this appointment. We want to publicly thank her and congratulate her.
Thank you.
Great, John.
We want to also join me in thanking Dawn and for thanking Pete, who also expressed interest in the position and has agreed to take on some other very important matters for us. It was a very difficult choice to make, but we're grateful that the enthusiasm from both of you has served this committee well, and we know that we'll continue to do so. We want to also mention that our ACC nominating committee will be responsible also for the nominations to our trial board, for our trial board members. Henry wants to give us some more information regarding how those two will work together, but there's more information on the ACC nominating committee and also the trial board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yes, for the ACC nominating committee, the application for the ACC itself, the two spots, as well as the two spots of the PAB, as well as the two spots the county executive would nominate members to. That is open online. So again, if you have somebody who you believe would be a good fit in your community, please direct them to that website so they can apply. And again, if you have any questions about them, happy to answer those. So again, the nominating committee will start doing interviews hopefully fairly soon, so we can begin to make sure that we get those nominees approved by the full PAB, and then also get them into the training and through all the HR process as well. Trial boards are a little bit different. Obviously, we mentioned them a bit in the first few meetings. The idea there is that the trial boards themselves will be on a more ad hoc basis than the ACC or the PAB, which meet monthly. The trial boards will meet only in response to a ACC decision which has been appealed. Also, the trial board will handle state ACC charges that take place in Baltimore County as well. So there's kind of two hats the trial board is going to wear. And for that, there's one member chosen by the PAB. The training for that is less intensive. It's only 2 days at the commission. So again, if there are people who who you think would be good fits that position, it will be compensated. It doesn't necessarily require the same level of training and commitment as the ACC does. So just keep that in mind as well. And again, thank you to both Peter and Nigeria for volunteering to help with the nominating committee role for that as well, so that they can recommend members to the PAB for nomination to the trial board. And we're not necessarily looking for just one person, but a pool of potential applicants who can serve, because again, based on the ad hoc nature with scheduling conflicts and based on the statute, which allows the striking of members of the trial board by the accused officer, we want to make sure that there's a pool of individuals who could be qualified, trained, or prepared to step in for that purpose.
Any questions about those two items? Okay. We will, thank you. We will need a motion to confirm the trial board and our decision to move forward in making nominations in the trial board nomination committee.
I move that the Baltimore County Police Accountability Board hereby creates a trial board nominating committee for the purpose of interviewing applicants for the trial boards and recommending applicants to the said boards. And I further move that Linda Shields, who was our chair, Henry Callegary, who's our coordination manager, Peter Fitzpatrick, and Nigeria rolling forward shall comprise the administrative charging committee, nominating committee.
That's the trial board nomination.
The trial board nominating committee. Yeah.
Second.
Motion and seconded. Any objections? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Yes, guys have that. Thank you. So we're gonna move on to our new business, the District 6 vacancy. And Henry will give us an update on that.
Yep, so following the last meeting, Reverend Petersberger stepped down from the PAB. Of course, we thank her for her tenure, which again, I think was first very important few months and few meetings. So just to give background on the process, the councilman from District 6, Councilman Mike Hertel, has 30 days from the date that Ms. Petersberger stepped down, and that information was transmitted to the council to recommend up to 3 nominees who will then be, again, interviewed, and there will be a nominee presented by the county executive to the council. It's a similar process as District 5. We're just, again, later time frame there. And for both District 5 and District 6, as well as what will be District 1, those positions the current terms run through the end of June of this year. And then there will need to be another nomination for the next 3-year term.
Okay. While Reverend Claire and I missed each other a couple of times via emails and phone calls and messages, I do want to publicly also thank her for her time and her tenure while short with our board. And while brief, we appreciate all of her contributions and willingness to serve this board and the public. And we have been assured that she will continue to be an active and concerned voice up for the citizens of Baltimore County. So we want to thank her. We are reminded under our new business, the second item, for upcoming community events, please don't forget to let us know if you have any, if you plan to speak at any, or if you have been requested to speak at any. Please keep us informed on the groups that you'll be speaking with, and so that we can prepare any follow-up that's necessary, or any questions they may have or information they may require. Also, the information and your speaking engagements will help us to add information to our annual reports as to how we have been participating with the public.
And also, there will be an updated, the PowerPoint and the one-pager will be updated, just waiting for that to get uploaded onto the website with regards to the District 6 vacancy, so that there's no confusion there with members of the public as to who's on the roster. So once that's uploaded, it will be on the website, and I will be sending out the revised version as well to all members.
And the PowerPoint worked pretty well. I used it last week. So you did okay.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Great. Thank you for that. And we don't always give feedback, right? Thank you for that. So next on the agenda is just to confirm that our next meeting is scheduled for March 20th. And again, at 12 o'clock. We expect to be back in room 118. but if anything changes, everyone will be so notified. At this time, we will go, we'll accept any questions or public comment at this time. From anyone, either present or on the website. Yes, to see him, so. Hi, how are you?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. For the record, my name is Peter Richards.
Yes.
I'm hoping that at a very near point in time, minutes of the meetings will be provided as well as the video, which will make the meetings of the PAB much more accessible to the public, as opposed to sitting through a 2-hour meeting video. My other suggestion relates to the quality of the video that is available to the public. It'll be interesting to compare how the equipment in this room is different from the one in the room downstairs. I've been to both the in-person meetings and the video meetings, and my observation is that the video meetings are quite difficult to understand everyone. And that's not helpful, especially since meeting minutes are not available. I'd like to ask that the members watch a portion of one of the videos, just to see, for example, how you are heard by the public when you're trying to conduct your business and when you're sharing information. It may help you understand the frustration of the public in trying to follow along, if you will. And it might also give you some insight into your own projection or manner of presenting. So those are my 2 comments, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And on that note, the availability of meeting minutes, as soon as we have someone on board as the secretary, we will immediately begin to move into the phase where meetings can be, minutes can be available in writing.
And when will that be?
And so that is something that is, Peter, I keep calling you Peter.
It's okay.
Peter, you want to sit over here?
My name is Peter, so I.
No, but I'm trying to get his name out again.
No, that's all right.
Henry and I did talk about that, so he can give you an
Yeah.
update on it.
So again, that we're moving forward with that process as part of the budget process and making sure there's available resources for that position.
Does that mean it's not even on the horizon until July 1st?
We can discuss internally about, again, what the best way for minutes is to make sure that members of the public have access to a complete record and they're able to follow along. So we'll continue to have discussions about that.
And I do want you to know that I have attempted today to project better and hopefully personally understand what you were mentioning about that. So I appreciate that. And
There's
always
no
go for improvement.
It's the equipment, it's not the people.
No. I think it may be a combination.
The sound is much
hopefully
better. The sound is
Thank
much
you.
better today. So
Okay.
it is much better.
Okay, maybe the room acoustics and all of that. So we'll definitely keep that in mind.
Well, I will take the opportunity in the town hall at Towson on the 1st to suggest to the county executive that the resources should be made available for this important communication tool of the board. I've been on numerous boards and commissions throughout my career, including on a board of Blue Ribbon Commission for the county. And I have never seen one that did not provide minutes shortly after the meeting, circulated to all of the members for their review, comment, edit, whatever, and then made available as soon as possible to the public. So I think, especially for this very critical board, that it's a real disservice to you and to the public that this is not addressed. And I will not be satisfied if it takes until a new budget starts on July 1st. Because if that's the case, then there's going to be another delay because the position will have to be advertised, people have to be interviewed, there's a selection process, which of course is normal, and so July 1st is now September 1st, and that is really a disservice to you and to
Thank you so much for your comments. Yeah, appreciate it.
I have a question. Is there anything prohibiting like minutes being created by you or Henry or somebody else?
No.
To be? I mean, because usually you're agenda becomes your minutes, so it would probably be easy to just at least put in the basic important information for the public, if that's something we can do, and recreate for prior meetings.
Okay, and we'll work on finding the best way to do that.
I got a sort of question that's on that same note. We record all these meetings, right? So when we're talking about minutes, are we talking about written minutes? Not you don't want the recordings, you want the written minutes.
Yeah, so
Well, I would be very happy to have a transcription of the video, which is often available. In fact, when the county council has their meetings, they can make available transcriptions, direct transcriptions.
Okay.
So that would be better. They're of course more lengthy, and sometimes minutes, which are more of a summary, serve the purpose. So as long as there was something written that people could at least skim, I think that would be helpful and possibly relieve the pressure to have a person do it, because WebEx has that capability within the system. It's just a matter of turning it on or activating it or whatever. So that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, there is something to say that sometimes the WebEx captures things accurately and inaccurately. It just depends on, to your point, PETA, projection and, if people are audible. But it is a feature of WebEx that we can talk offline with OIT to make sure, and we can test even this meeting out, Henry, to see how the transcribe appears and if it is indeed accurate, but at least there's a written
Absolutely.
document to accompany the visible recording.
Yeah, even though spell check can make mistakes.
Right.
It's still,
it does.
it's useful.
It sure does.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else have his or her hand up? No? Great.
I just have an internal
Yes.
housekeeping. What is our process for asking for something to be added to the agenda for a meeting?
I got a plan on that. So I try to send them out the rough draft of the agenda to members the week before, but at any point, if there's anything which you or any other member would like to have on the agenda or discuss, best way to put it on the agenda, just let me know. We can, again, make sure that information, if it's something which is, a talking point, or even if it needs to be done in a closed session, something that's about the, odds and ends, I'm happy to include it and make sure that we're able to have those conversations on the record for the meetings.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask one more question? If I were watching on WebEx today instead of here in person, how would I signify that I had a comment or question at the end of the meeting?
We have a hands raised capability.
Using that? Okay.
Or folks will speak up and say.
Well, they're not on the camera yet. They can.
Not on the camera.
Yeah.
Because I know that Zoom has the hands up, but I'm not.
WebEx does too.
Does it? Okay, great, thank you.
There's the chat feature as well, PETA, which someone could type in, which I think we actually used the first meeting.
You did.
Who would that be? Who's monitoring the chat? And
So
It's
typically-
usually Lisa.
Lisa.
Lisa had a family matter to attend to this afternoon, so she was here for the first part of the meeting and then she had to leave, but she is actively monitoring the WebEx portion of it.
Okay, and so somebody picks that up when she leaves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, so Henry's been,
Thanks.
Not a
double
problem.
duty. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And if there are no other questions, no other business, then we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Well, I move that we adjourn until March the 20th, 12 p.m. Downstairs at room 118. If I can get a second.
Second.
There are no objections. We'll stand adjourned.
I'll be the big objection to that.
No objections. Thanks, everyone. We are.
Compliance.
I think